Nathaniel Nongo, welcoming you to this Friday edition of the program. And if this may be your first time tuning into Perspectives, kindly be informed that Perspectives is audience participatory, usually broadcast between 9 and 11 a.m. And at 10 o'clock, we allow you, the listener, to contribute on what we are discussing. The number through which you can reach us at 10 o'clock on the program is 0814 335 9292. 0814 335 9292. Meanwhile, the SMS line through which you can also participate on the program is 0912 699 9404. The line once again 0912 699 9404. That line is also available on WhatsApp. You may also listen to us by logging on to our website on www.igetradiotv.com and access other content as well. We're available on Radio Garden and on social media platforms where our content is streaming. You may also download the iGet Radio and TV app from Google Play Store. And it's a one-stop app which avails you the platforms of our television online, the radio, as well as newspaper. Please join us to be a part of this discussion and other exciting programs of iGate Radio. Stay tuned as we take a short breather, and once we're back, our discussion begins. Kindly stay with us. Welcome back from that short break. Let me begin with you, Barrister Olegede. Happy World Poetry Day to you.
Thank you
as a poet and as an author, leader of the literary community in Benue State. Now, let's look at this day, what is its significance and how it is being celebrated globally.
So, thank you very much for that question. Let me thank iGate Radio for always paying attention to the literary world in terms of allowing us the opportunity to always feature on their programs like this time. So the significance of poetry to the globe, I think, has been simply made something important, just using the same words, I guess, but by the United Nations realizing that poetry is a preservation of our history. We can preserve our history through poetry. We can preserve our language through poetry. And so through the ages, you've had people who have been able to document what happened in their era. We hear from my little investigation on Wikipedia that as far as the English poem is concerned, it dates back to the 7th century. It may have dated back even beyond then, but then the first traces of what came on as poems started as a hymn from a human being, a man. But then it wasn't in this form. It wasn't in this English form as we have it today. But it originated from the Anglo-Saxon era. That was the the first form of English language as we know it today. And just the fact that someone took time to document something in that era, and then it passed on from one generation to another, and then people kept adding, developing, we can look back and see what that era was like. So that's one aspect, preserving the history of a people, preserving the language of a people, even when the language changes, transforms, takes other forms, and becomes, another, how we know it as it is today. It is handed down, it is passed, and then the culture of the people are preserved in the language as it is used in those poems. As a matter of fact, poetry has so many forms, and some, like we talked about the epic poem, which discusses the history of a people, from that era where poetry was made popular. You could tell what the people were like, what their way of life was like, how they interacted, the things that bother them, what their concerns, and everything. So I think seeing how important this element of preservation of history, of language was why the United Nations felt, okay, we should set aside a day to celebrate poetry as a means of, people preserving the most important aspect of our lives. Because if you take language away from a person, I don't know who that person would be. If you take history away from a person, there's hardly anything about it's like the person, there's nothing, before that person existed, So, but then this two aspects, for me, I think are the reasons why the United Nations decided to make this day a very significant day. And apart from that, you mentioned activism. Poetry helps us to say what you have forms of poetry that are protests against the norm. Maybe something is happening, like in Nigeria, we had the killing of twins at a point. I'm not aware that anybody wrote about that particular happening in those days, but you don't be surprised to know that even the mere fact that such a thing happened could have been documented in the people's history, their language, and maybe someone talked about it, and even the origin of a people, in the days that we live here. A lot of people have forgotten where they come from, but with poetry, if you go back to the songs, because poetry, sometimes it manifests in different ways. Like as I mentioned, the first poetry in English language was a hymn. So even the songs that are sung by a person in a certain age that passes down from generation to generation is one that will tell you the history of such a person, where the person came from. So all of these things are, I think, what the United Nations considered very significant to our existence as human beings, that this day was set aside as a day to celebrate, to mark poetry.
All right. Now, Ms. Ortega, I'm with you. Also give us your thoughts on what you make of the significance of this day, World Poetry Day.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Just to add to what my chairman has elaborately explored. Poetry is a contribution to reality. A good poetry is a contribution to reality because it extends the people's reality, the reality of their experiences, and the reality of the person who is writing it. When a good poem is read, there is no way the universe will be the same again after a good poem is read. Because poetry helps everyone to have knowledge about himself. There are two things involved. Why the poet is trying to create knowledge, the knowledge is creation of knowledge is anchored on beauty. And over the years, as she has rightly pointed out, poetry, you use, like some of us that write poetry, I always say that I use poetry even to sanitize myself.
Oh, that's
because, yes, there are things that are happening in society that you will find them as against what you think should be the norm. So when you write about it, the poet writes to and for the society. You write to the society to conscientize the society about those happenings. Then you make a cry for the society when things are going wrong. Take, for instance, issues of armed banditry, on a killing spree across the country. Poets are writing about it. And by writing about it, they draw the attention of the government to the things that are. It's only that the poet knows better. He knows how best to utter that cry. Otherwise, what he's saying is what is affecting society is facing. So his role is very significant. And I think that is why UNESCO have to set aside this day for poets and for people not just to celebrate poetry, but to meditate, to reflect on how poetry has been used, to correct societal ills and to advance the cause of the society generally. So I think that is what poetry is basically all about, and that is the significance of the word Poetry Day as we are celebrating today.
All right. Now, Barrister Ulegede, let me come to you again. This time, let's look at the theme for the World Poetry Day this year, which is poetry as a bridge for peace and inclusion. In the context of our experience, especially in Nigeria, speak to us about this theme, poetry as a bridge for peace and inclusion.
Okay. When I saw that theme, I was wondering if they had Nigeria in mind when they crafted that theme, poetry as a bridge for peace, for building peace and inclusion in society. And that was because if you look at where we are today in Nigeria, we have so many issues of insecurity, around insecurity. When you look at, March is designated International Women's Day, and my thoughts went quickly to whether women were included enough, whether the issue of inclusion as it relates to women in governance and even in decision making, that's decision making, and then even in matters that concern them like security is something that has really been ingrained. And I see, my answer will be that there's a lot to be desired in that angle. I don't think that we have enough security in Nigeria today. I don't think inclusion, not just in terms of women now, even for people living with disabilities, for certain political things. How do I put it? Decisions that concern maybe the choice of minorities have not really. Minorities, are they really included in the scheme of decision making? Are they properly considered? I started thinking about those things deeply when I saw the theme of this year's World Poetry Day. And for insecurity in Nigeria today, particularly for us in Benue, you wake up every morning to the news of many people getting killed in some village, farmers getting slaughtered on their farms, and it leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. As a matter of fact, today it appears we have even become sort of comfortable with the things that should distress us, like the killings that are going on. It's as if we have we have learned to just accept that this is just the way we should move on. So this is where the poet comes in. You see things that are not right in your society. You see things that people are getting very comfortable with, but perhaps because you are not in that position to use your stroke of pen to correct them in terms of physically correcting these things. But you just want to show how you feel. Maybe just your displeasure. You can register your displeasure by way of writing. Yeah. You can also, like he said, draw attention of the government of the day to what is happening, because sometimes these things are happening and you are feeling very helpless, but you know that the issue of security is in the hands of the government, because that is what the Constitution says. And you're wondering, so why is this thing going on? And then that's your question. You can also ask it by way of poetry. Yeah. You can also, do a dirge for the dying, for those who were dead out of the insecurity issues that we're having. That's also poetry. You can you just lamentation. You can lament what is happening in your society. You can actually do that by writing. And then when you talk about the issue of inclusion, included PWDs not being included, or certain segments of societies like the minorities being left out in certain decision making that shouldn't be, you can also throw those laments out there in your poetry. You can about this issue. Because people are not going to agree with you. On the side of the security problem, there's always a dispute of whether asking can you equate a human life to that of an animal? Yeah. Because the way it is in our society today, it's as if there's really no demarcation between, human life and that of an animal. Like you're human, just like you pull a chicken to the market and you slaughter it and eat it. It looks like that's the way human life is been. It's been regarded in our society. There's nothing, because you've seen that this is what it looks like. You want to change the perception as well. You can also document it. So this theme for me is so robust, and it speaks to our current realities. My colleague said earlier that poetry is our reality. That is just what it is. We're looking at the situation. We're querying the situation. We're denouncing the situation. We're lamenting the situation. We're also correcting the situation and giving maybe suggestions on the way forward to how we can be better humans to ourselves.
All right. That's quite extensive. Now, Mr. Ortega.
Yeah.
The same issue of the theme, poetry as a bridge for peace and inclusion.
Yes.
Did the framers of this thing have Nigeria in mind?
Yes.
About a circumstance to have come up with a theme for World Poetry Day this year?
Yeah.
In that fashion, you would say.
Yes. Yes, poetry as a bridge for peace. You see, one of the basic functions of poetry is to give dignity to a people's experience, or people's experiences, their sufferings, their joys, the dramas of their lives. So in Nigeria now, peace is almost taking a flight. And the poet has a lot to do. Because with poetry, like my chairman said, when things are not going right, like the killings that we kept referring to, as a poet, you are not supposed to take your gun or take your, to be armed to go there and defend your people. I think that is what the late Christopher Okibo did, and writers all over the world who didn't like it condemned him, that he went to the war front and killed himself. No, you are not supposed to do that. You are supposed to use your pen to draw attention. You can use your pen to create peace, to talk about peace, to talk about how we, as the different sections of this country, can look inwards, can look for ways that you can unite and then create a space for progress and development of this country. And I think a lot of poets have been doing that. If you read the poetry of Niyi Oshundere and the poetry of Odia Ofemun, most of the Nigerian poets are protest poets. They cannot escape the tag of protest poets because of the thematic preoccupation. I already stressed that the language of poetry is language of beauty. Somebody can be seriously protesting, but when you listen to what he's saying, you see beauty inside. So with poetry, I think poetry is one of the possible arts we can use to create peace, to build bridges in a society like ours, where things are not going as we expected, where people are suffering because of not because of their own doings, where the economy is the economy is not friendly and the life is so difficult. I think poetry can help us. And another thing is poetry creates a space for relaxation too. Sometimes you are so angered, sometimes things are very difficult, you are tired of life. By retiring to read a piece of poem can give you some form of encouragement at that particular moment. So I think, like you said, the theme for this year's World Poetry Day is meant for us. It's like it is meant for us in Nigeria. Oh. If you look at what is happening in our society, if you look at the distractions, if you look at the challenges, the social challenges that we're encountering, and I think we need a lot of poetry. We need to write a lot of poetry. We need to read a lot of poetry, to keep us, to mellow us down, to keep us, I said I use it to sanitize myself. So we can use poetry to sanitize our society to bring peace. And
into Perspectives on Agate Radio 95.5 Star FM Makurdi. We are discussing World Poetry Day, observance of World Poetry Day. I've been joined here in the studio by two erudite authors who themselves are poets, and they're offering thoughts with us. Barrister Wanyo Legede is with us, and Mr. Mike Otsega. And later at 10 o'clock, you, the listener, can also participate by phoning in on the number 0814-335-9292 to offer your thoughts on what we are discussing. The number, once again, is 0814-335-9292. Meanwhile, the SMS line is reactivated. You may utilize it to contribute. The number is 0912-699-9404. I take it again, 0912-699-9404. It's also available on WhatsApp, and please remember to include your full name and location when you are sending your message. Log on to our website on www.agateradio.tv.com to listen to us and access other content as well. You may download the Agate Radio and TV app from Google Play Store, which avails you the platforms of our television online, the radio, newspaper, as well as on Radio Garden, where streaming there, and on other social media platforms as well. Please join us there. Now, Barrister Olegede, I'm with you. How can we use poetry as a tool for social change and activism? Positive activism, not negative one.
Okay, we're always afraid of activism. Even the mere mention of the name activism, brings up a lot of fears in the hearts of people.
Yes.
But like you said, positive change. There's so much that's been done in Nigeria today regarding that. The work of Uche Chukwumerije is one that I find very fascinating with what he's doing in bridging or bringing knowledge about unity. The unity of Nigeria is something that I find a very consistent theme in his spoken word poetry. Yeah. You also have a number of people who they've been consistent in Benue here. Professor Maria Ajima, most of her works, if you read them with deeply, you would find that element of anger about what is happening in terms of people, women. She addresses in one way or the other. You could see that element of protest against what is going on politically, socially, the social decadence in our society. This element of inordinate ambition in acquiring everything and leaving people with nothing. You have subtle themes in the works of Professor Letitia Bai-Venite as well, which addresses a lot of the issues concerning insecurity in her Tangled Threads. Yes. And then currently Desert of forgotten the title, but Desert of something, Reincarnation.
Yes.
So poets here killing farmers, between her displeasure, their dislike about the state of things, the responses, some people feel that people should be more proactive in addressing their security. Maybe we shouldn't, like we talk about the people in Plateau State. Why would you be killed in your sleep all the time? Is there not isn't there something you can do that would better protect you? But you want to address those themes, those things in your writings, and people are doing that. The whole issue of disparity between the poor and the rich in our society is a theme that continues to be explored by writers. In fact, as a person, I found that theme boring at some point in my life, that I felt, I'm tired of talking about the poverty situation in my country. I'm not going to write anything about poverty until I have a good story to tell. And I think I would expect you to ask me, did I ever get to that point? I don't think so. I don't think but I had to come back. And so I had a 15-year lull because of that, because I didn't want to just keep writing about those things. The whole element of writing or being socially active poetically may not necessarily mean, of course, you as a poet, you want to see that change happen in your lifetime. Yeah. But it may not be. But we're hoping that our situation will be different, because I'm looking at when from the centuries that have passed, there were things people didn't like. Even in English culture, there were monarchies that came, and there were wicked kings that people protested against. People wrote, very pungent themes against. But it was as time went on that change began to happen. What we see today in some of these very developed societies, it was not like that. Things were not the way they are today in those societies. What we enjoy today, just thinking that they have it all, they were products of activism. And we're hoping that in Nigeria, we will continue to speak about those things, the governance, the structure, the dividends, the things that affect us directly. For example, today, way back, if I'm writing, if I had to write when I was younger, I would have been writing about how I used to drink. Yes, that's something in fact, I document in some of my poems, how we used to come back from school and literally have our mouths on a tap, drinking water. Can you do that today? Young people don't even know that, except maybe for a borehole that's been dug and taps put out somewhere, and then they can. But in our time, we were able to do that. You would not talk about typhoid fever or anything, any stomach ache after drinking from that. It's coming directly from the water board. Today, you can't really do that. That means something went wrong at a point, and then we don't have water for the people. So just that element of remembering how it used to be could spur you onto getting our leaders to remember what it was like. Because people are even asking, they said, how come this same nation which gave you everything, which made you who you are today, is the same nation that you have not been able to bequeath your younger ones? Because we have Nigerians running away from their country. So those are very strong activist points that we should, continue to talk about. We should continue the conversation, the engagement, so that between us and our leaders, we will come to a point where we will all agree that indeed something needs to change for us to have a better society, there's no other way. And if looking at it critically, even when you say you're leaving, you're running away, you're leaving your country because of the conditions that have been created by humans like you, and you go to there's another contradiction that you're going to face out there. Maybe the contradiction of being a migrant in another country are completely, maybe the situations in some cases are worse than even you remaining in your country. Those are things that people have seen and are even writing as well. For those who are out there who have the inclination to also write, share their thoughts or their feelings about how they feel about certain situations. And that also brings back the knowledge to those who were here thinking that that's the only solution. Then when you open such a work and you read, it could give you a mindset shift. So we must continue in essence, activism as a writer is something that, in fact, that should be in Nigeria today, you really cannot write an entire collection of maybe 50 to 70 words and you're not protesting something. You're not protesting about it. It's very unusual. Even if you're discussing romance, the fact that the situation is affecting your romance will be a subject that you will explore in that. Somebody is writing an entire collection.
Somebody even say that all that Nigerians have written since independence is protest literature.
So, there you have it.
Anyway, listening to you, I must confess that you already sound like one of the activist poets.
No, to be honest, I am, but I'm trying to shed. I'm trying to shed it.
All right, now change
Yes.
and activism,
Yes.
and you are.
Like I said, I read somewhere that all that we have written, Nigerian writers have written since independence, places that are more stable have, where people can look at flowers and begin to write about them. No. Here, we have real issues challenging our existence, and we have to respond to these issues. In fact, most of the Nigerian poets have even responded to the point that even if you look at what they're writing, even though it is writing, it attacks you as if it is a spear through your mind. Take, for instance, the writings of the Nigerian poet Odia Ofemun, for instance. I recently read one of his poetry collections, and the title alone, he says, "I will ask questions with stones if they take my voice." That's the title of the work. I will ask questions with stones if they take the mother of Kudirat Abior, and so many other things, inconsistency in society, that he didn't want anybody to stop him from voicing out. So poets are doing all these things. Niyi Oshundare, for instance. Niyi Oshundare is one poet that has stood on the side of the ordinary Nigerians to ask questions to the government, to the leaders on their behalf. So I think we have not been in short of any activism. through our writings as Nigerian poets, as Nigerian writers. And I think we need to do even more, because questions keep, coming up. Issues keep throwing such questions up on a daily basis that we as writers need to respond to. So I think our poetry is essentially the poetry of protest. Should hear us actually reading this poetry, whether they are reading the poetry and internalizing what is being said in this poetry. But my consolation is that not to say it because they will not read is not even good, because the cost of not saying it will even be more detrimental than saying it and waiting for some day that somebody will have to read it, somebody will have to take steps. So we are not going to stop. We must continue. We must continue telling our story through our poetry. We must through our poetry. It's something we cannot stop to do until society listens to us, until those who should listen to us are able to listen to us and then do the needful.
All right. That poet, I was when you mentioned those questions, I was wondering whether he asked a question about it, so whether the questions were answered. But back to you, Barrister Olegede. We touched on this on the surface earlier. Let's dwell more extensively on what role poetry play in preserving cultural heritage and tradition.
That's a very fantastic question. So, well, basically, what we have had, the key examples we've had have been with English language. Incidentally, English happens to be a language that's spoken in almost, I don't know what the percentage is, but I think more than half of the world speaks English. They have colonized almost the entire world, so every thought is expressed in English language. But then poetry is in every single language. Every language has poetry embedded in it. The unfortunate situation for us today is that we have decided to abandon our heritage and then simply think in English. Most of our thoughts only happen in English language, and that is really, really unfortunate, because there's an expression in my native tongue that English cannot explain. So, but the fact that we think majorly in English, because for most of us who grew up in this generation, we can't really claim that our languages are our first language. We would rather say, but English that way, because a lot of times I deliberately want to think that I am trying to actually think in my own language. So you asked the question about how how poetry can be a tool for preserving our heritage, our cultural heritage, yes, and traditions.
Very.
So there are people who are making the effort, and we must commend them. And those are the people who are ensuring that they continue to write in our native tongues. So even there are two parts to it. Even if we do not write in our native tongue, which gives the entire process an originality that sets it in a class of its own, we also what we are writing in English language about ourselves, about our situations, about our conditions, are also a way of preserving our cultural, heritage. Because if I'm able to express myself, or if I'm able to language, but my desire would have been to see us dwell more on documenting some of this things in our native language, so that people now get to interpret them into English. But we have translate them into English language. We have people who are doing that. There are not many, and we would love to see more of that happening. But then another thing to ask is, are we really proud of our cultures? Are we even proud of it? Do we even know our culture? Do we even know what the culture of our people is? Because you cannot write about what you do not know. You can only write about what you know. But then we see that sometimes in our writings we focus more on what we want to sell, or what we think the people want to hear. Now I'm talking in terms of what's like people who are selling movies or whatever. Because for me, there's poetry in everything. Yeah. When you look at drama, as much very condensed language, you're beautifying, and just what you would have said in maybe 10,000 words, you decide to say it in maybe 50 or 1,000 words in a poetic form. So for us as Nigerians particularly, I think our cultures, our traditions, they are endangered species today, because not many people have taken the time to document who we are, what we stand for. As a matter of fact, I can say that some of us are even ashamed of where we come from, so we do not really want to explore. I remember that there are cultural themes that our people have been able to do at events, very traditional, very key, like the installation of a king or something. And there are the tribes that make up the Igede thing. For every single, every clan that makes up who the Igede people are. Yes. Okay. So they chant, they chant them and give specific instances of who this race, who these races are. How they've, certain key features of these races are brought out in those chants. And then people get to learn and hear about who they are. They tell you if their own gifts were about farming, that chant will explain it. If it's about whatever it is about, it explains it, and then you know what this people stand for, what this group or what this clan stands for. So you have this passed from one generation to another, and it is so organized in the sense that a particular clan, which is regarded as the most senior, is the one who takes on that role. Not just anybody, you see. So those things are very special ways that we, have tried to, from our roots, preserve the culture. So there's this, I talked about this element of being ashamed of who we are and not wanting to therefore preserve what we have. Those are things that, but I realized that the Igede people have gone ahead to preserve that in a book. Someone was supposed to perform that function one time. So like I mentioned, only somebody from that particular clan that are the eldest of all the others, or that are the eldest, would take that responsibility. And then she happened to be a woman, and she said, let me get the book. And she did it with the book because it has been documented. That was something, isn't it? And I believe then we now have our folklore, very special, aspect of traditional storytelling. You have folklore that have been passed on from one generation to another. I remember how my grandmother, used to tell these fantastic stories. Now I go back to my mother. Unfortunately, maybe because of the lead in our water and everything, we're not able to keep the memories, like every single detail of those stories So we pass them from, but the good thing about what I'm doing is I'm trying to document them in, not now, they did it orally, but we are now trying to document these things in written form. So that's another way of preserving, because some of the stories are unique to the places where they were told. For example, if you go to Tivland, there's a story that has been told from one generation to the other that is very specific to them. Nobody else can take credit for that. So it's the same thing. And some of them even, because the culture of the people from generations have been, like you have the Igede oral tradition, who tells you where they come from, what happened, where they came from, and all that. That is unique to them. The people talk about how they came from Cameroon. All that are things that we should document, because those are things that were passed of oral tradition. We may not be able to get exactly what it was like from the very beginning, but if we do, those of us who have who have the advantage of learning about them now, and who have the advantage of English language to document them, can actually document them. And then those people who are also preserving language in terms of writing them, creating dictionaries in those languages for people to build on, can also document them in those languages. So those are, I think, some of the ways in which we can preserve our heritage.
All right. Now, Mr. Sega,
Yeah.
why Barrister Wanyi Legede was too old, but I grew up hearing the likes of Take, Golozo, Tondu Kumbu, and all of that. Some of these have been documented. David Ojime of the Benin State University has written a book about the poetry of Golozo, for instance. Would you say these oral poets have continued to sustain relevance in our society today to present?
That's a very good question. Poetry is essentially an oral art. Even where it is written down, it is meant to be recited. And you find it in all communities and all traditions across the world, even before the written literature came here. Oral literature was there before the literary literature came. So those people you are referring to, the Gorozos, the Obadiahs, their poetry, what they were singing, their songs are complete poetry. Translate them into English, and you will see all the literary devices, you will see all that written poets, even in England and elsewhere.